This is the only time in the last 40 years that prices have gone down after a presidential election. Market crisis across the board. Everybody remembers what the economy was like in 2008. So sales declined sharply in addition to prices. All right, so the question that everybody is asking, what is going to happen in 2025 in the housing market? And you may have seen some comments online about what happens after presidential elections, because we have to take that into account. This is a unique year. Once every 4 years, we have a presidential election. And so that is one factor that you got to take into account when looking to the future and what's going to happen. And one of the best predictors of the future is definitely what has happened in the past. And so what we're going to do today is go through the last 10 presidential elections since I've been alive, basically, and what has happened every single year to see if we can pick up any patterns on what potentially is going to happen in 2025. So we're going to start in 2020, and that was the first Biden versus Trump election. The prices increased significantly due to the COVID-19 housing boom, right? They went up almost 19% in 2021. So huge increase. We all remember that. That was recent history. And then the number of homes that sold also surged across the country because of the record low interest rates. In 2016, when Trump ran against Clinton, prices increased after the election, driven by strong economic growth and low mortgage rates at the time also. And then sales also, it was kind of slow right after the election, but then they took off, and the number of sales also increased after the election. Then we go back to 2012. This is when Obama was re-elected. The prices increased after the election, mainly driven by the market recovering from the 2008 crash. And then sales also increased. The number of sales also increased after the election. As we go back to 2008, this was Obama versus McCain. This is the only time in the last 40 years that prices have gone down after a presidential election. And the main reason was, most experts agree, it was due to the housing market crash that happened the year prior. It was unrelated to the presidential election itself. It was market crisis across the board. Everybody remembers what the economy was like in 2008. So sales declined sharply in addition to prices. Going back to 2004, this is when Bush was re-elected. Prices increased significantly during a housing bubble. This is when the bubble took off, right? So again, there was something else going on in the market there, but they rose by 13% the year after the 2004 election. And same thing, the number of sales due to the high demand and favorable economic conditions continued to rise. Going back to 2000, Bush versus Gore, prices increased moderately after the election, but they continued to rise, and the number of sales were pretty stable, but went up a little bit after the election. In 1996, when Clinton was re-elected, prices continued to rise steadily after the election, and the economy was doing very well in those years, and so sales also increased due to those economic conditions. 1992, Clinton versus Bush. Prices increased modestly following the recession of the early 90s. The economy was recovering, but prices went up, and sales followed and continued to rebound and went up also after the presidential election. And then in 1988, Bush versus Dukakis, prices continued to rise because the economy was doing great. Everybody remembers that kind of boom in the mid 80s after Reagan was first elected, and sales increased that year also. In 1984, when Reagan was re-elected, prices continued to go up because the economy was growing, everything was doing well in the 80s, and sales also rose because mortgage rates declined in that year. And so the big takeaway here is, in 9 out of the last 10 presidential election years, the year following it, prices went up and the number of sales went up, barring any type of economic crisis. And I think everybody can agree that we don't really have any type of economic crisis like we saw in 2006, 2007 happening right now. And it's a pretty safe bet that we are going to see an increase in sales and an increase in prices in 2025. And I'd like to note, if you look at all of this data, it doesn't matter who won, right? It's almost 50-50 Republican and Democrat. It doesn't matter who won the election. It just mattered that the election was over. All of the uncertainty and the focus that was put on the election is over, and then people get back to their normal lives. I think that more than ever is what we're going to see this year. There was a ton of uncertainty, a ton of apprehension due to this very contentious election. And now that it's over, consumers are going to return back to normal life. They'll come back into the market. Most people are thinking interest rates are going to come down a little bit. I don't think they're going to come down that much, but most consumers are starting to accept that the higher interest rate is where we're going to be going into the future. We're never going to get back down to those 3% or even 4% interest rates. And so consumers will go back to buying if you need to buy. So that's a prediction. I like to predict based on data and past results versus kind of what I feel. But I think based on what we've seen in the past, we can definitely expect something similar in the future. So looking forward to seeing if I'm right in 2025. And if you disagree, please reach out. You can always put them in the comments below. Email me at dylan@buyabigisland.com, or you can book a meeting with me directly in the calendar link in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. That's your 2025 sales predictions. Aloha.